Hey everyone, Shakarez here, or better known as Kayle, and today I'm going to analyze Overpow's Kayle. He played with her twice versus NIP and showed that she is far from being dead and is still a very strong pick, with a strong level 2, a decent mid game, and a superb transition to late game, with DPS levels similar to that of a marksman. Now, what I found most interesting about Overpow's playstyle is that it's very distinct, very different from Alex Siege's Kayle or my own, but this was mostly because of the importance of the game, rather than KMT's playstyle that is usually very aggressive. Now, let's start with runes, and in game 1 versus Orianna, he ran attack speed marks, armor seals, magic resist flat glyphs, and presumably hybrid penetration quintessences. Now, I can't tell what quintessences he was using, but it was either magic penetration or hybrid penetration. Both good options for Kayle, despite AP being straight up better option. In game 2 versus Riven, he ran attack speed marks, armor seals, ability power flat glyphs, and ability power flat quintessences. So, two very different setups, and why? Now, Orianna has a very strong laning phase, being able to zone Kayle with auto attacks and her constant attacks with command attack and command dissonance, hence the magic resist. Also, it was a very important game, and Overpow said he was nervous, so playing it safe was probably a good idea. As for the lack of ability power quintessences, it was either one of two things. One, he used the wrong setup by mistake, or two, he was going for the late game with the added hybrid penetration. Also, one thing I wanted to mention is that Orianna gets armor and magic resist from her shield, so the added hybrid penetration runes may have been to negate that. Versus Riven, he really did not need the magic resist and could use offensive glyphs, AP being the perfect option. Just as an added note, Overpow was using a crit mark and a crit seal, which gives him about 1.3.4% crit for that lucky event that could eventually happen. So let's move on to Masteries, and we really can't see all of Overpow's Masteries by looking at his base stats. However, he answered in his AMA that he likes to run 2703. However, he was not running Fleet of Foot in the games played, so I'm just assuming he ran those points into mana regen. However, instead of trying to guess all the Masteries that he was running, let's break down the important points for Kayle in the offense tree. Now, Tier 1, Fury, Overpow runs 5% extra attack speed to give him smoother last hitting and overall higher DPS. You can run Sorcery here that will give you the higher levels of CDR with more ease. It's really playstyle dependent, run what suits you best. Tier 2 and 3, Brute and Mental Force, Martial, and Arcane Mastery. Now, Kayle picks up both sides of the mastery points. Why pick up AD? Well, she has a 1 AD ratio on her Reckoning, and her Righteous Fury does splash damage based on attack damage, not to mention the basic attack counterpart of it. In tiers 3 and 4, it's important to pick up Blade Weaving and Spell Weaving. Kayle probably uses these points better than any other champion. Her Righteous Fury counts as both a spell and an auto attack, so you'll gain 3 stacks from each side. That's double 3% increase, one on the auto attack counterpart and another on the spell counterpart. In Tier 5, Devastating Strikes and Arcane Blade. Devastating Strikes is the dream of any hybrid champion. Kayle is no exception. Arcane Blade is picked up by any mage really. Kayle just uses it better than any of them because she auto-attacks much more. Havoc in Tier 6 is pretty obvious. The rest is pretty dependent on how many points you want to spec into offense. Now for skill order, Kayle will almost always max Q first, maxing her E or W second depending on the playstyle and matchups. Overpow chooses to max Righteous Fury, her E, second in both games, going for the most DPS possible. Now let's move on to build, and Kayle has a core build that should almost always be built, which is Nashor's Tooth and Lichbane. Overpow also chooses to build early tier 2 boots because he probably likes the early mobility, not to mention Sorcerer's Shoes gives you a pretty good power spike. Also on the topic of boots, if you're going for an offensive choice, Sorcerer's Shoes will always be better than Berserker's Greaves in terms of raw DPS. And talking a bit more about the Lichbane, it's the best second item assuming you can get 2 procs on it. And Overpow followed his build with Void Staff, Death Cap, and Deathfire Grasp. Now, Void Staff is the best third item on Kayle's build, assuming enemies have more than 60 magic resist. Now, to give an example, at these points in the game, Amumu already had Locket of the Iron Solari. Karma in Game 1 and Annie in Game 2 already had at least a Chalice, not to mention the top laner that will usually build a Spirit Visage. In competitive play, resists are usually built earlier, so the earlier you can get that magic penetration, the better. About the endgame build, Rabadons and Deathfire Grasp are two common items on some AP mages. The latter isn't common on Kayle, however, so why the pick? Reason is tank killing. Deathfire Grasp is usually used to combo on a squishy target, but in most occasions Overpow used it to shred tanks, with the active dealing 15% of a champion's max health and 20% damage amplification for 4 seconds. Think of it as Kayle's old Reckoning that used to amplify damage done by 10% at max rank. I haven't mentioned another part of DFG, which is the CDR. Kayle can no longer reach the 40% solely from blue buff and Nashor's Tooth. Now, with Overpow having DFG, he can simply grab blue buff or a blue elixir to get that juicy 40% that gives him a lot of burst and sustain damage, not to mention a 30-second ultimate. Speaking of CDR, and throughout the game, before getting DFG, Overpow carried blue elixir a lot, and this was to put him at the highest value possible of CDR when fighting. Now, you may ask yourself the reason behind the lack of Zhonya's Hourglass. Truth is, Kayle's ultimate works as one, and when Overpow didn't self-cast the ultimate, he showed superb positioning, which allowed him to survive and ult his teammates in more than one occasion. Now let's go into gameplay, and Overpow played very differently the early game from one game to the other, mostly due to the opponent champion being very different. Now versus Orianna, he held back and played near his turret. Despite being pushed a lot, he managed to keep up in CS throughout the game, and then proved to be more useful than his lane counterpart. Versus Riven, he played a bit more aggressively, constantly pushing the lane. With the aggressive setup he had, he was able to push Riven into her own turret, making her lose a lot of CS. Again, the laning phase was very stale, and Overpow played it very safe throughout. He only died at 20 minutes in the first game and 25 minutes in the second game. Now, going on to late game is where Overpow really shined and showed why Kayle isn't to be trifled with. His positioning in teamfights was absolutely amazing, which allowed him to ult his teammates rather than himself in key moments. Now, going on to game 1, KMT had Vayne and Kayle, two very strong late game champions, so their strategy was very simple: to press NIP into their base with strong split pushers and a heavy tanky frontline to keep them safe. 37 minutes in, and after figuring out why they couldn't catch Zoro, which was with the mid lane ward that was constantly catching Jankos on Elise, Overpow roams top, and alongside Xaxis they managed to kill Zoro. The kill on Zoro allows KMT to pick up an uncontested Baron. After this, KMT sets up shop, sending Vayne to a solo lane, Kayle to another, and keeping the bulk of the team on mid lane, waiting in the wings. Now, since they didn't want to get engaged on, and as NIP has a very strong pickoff comp, they end up faking a retreat to Baron, and Overpow goes into their base and gets not one, but 2 inhibitors. NIP arrive too late and end up losing both Baron and 2 inhibitors. After a siege with a mistake from NIP's Hercubot, KMT take their first win. Now, game 2 was a bit more interesting, but still a very solid display of good tactics by KMT to avoid a very strong pickoff comp by NIP. As I mentioned, Overpow pushed Nuke Duck into his own turret the whole game, leaving him free to roam. Right when Zoro and Hercubot wanted to dive Xaxis on top lane, Overpow, Vander, and Jankos appear for the counter. Despite Overpow not picking up any kills, he gets 2 assists and KMT pull ahead. Despite losing some fights, KMT was generally always equal or ahead in gold. 40 minutes in, and KMT tries to stop NIP from getting Baron, but they fail. However, Overpow was in a position where he could ult Xaxis without putting himself in danger, so they lose no one. After this weird standoff where no one would go in, KMT finally decide to re-engage. And why the wait? One simple reason: kill ultimate. Now let's see how the fight breaks out.
Always dangerous. Talisman used, they turn it back around. There was just a bait. Jankos is now going to get caught out, stunned in there. That's going to be Overpow now they get caught on. Hercubot's a little deep. That's going to be a good counter strike coming out from Xaxis, but this is a Baron up ninjas in pajamas. Jankos does take down Mithy off of the side there. Nuke Duck is in a duel as well, but there's going to be Freeze taking down Xaxis. Nuke Duck running for his life. The culling being used, but not really finding much damage onto Vander, and it's actually NIP that lost 2 members.
So KMT ended up going 2 for 1 despite being up against a Baron team, and this was because Overpow could ult Xaxus, who ended up sustaining through a lot of damage. Despite dying in the end to freeze, he was enough of a distraction for KMT to pick up 2 kills. The thing I wanted to showcase is Overpow's positioning, which allows him to ult Xaxus rather than himself. So after poking 0-0, he gets caught by a Mumu's bandage toss, but he didn't have the Curse of the Sad Mummy to follow it up, as he had used it a minute prior. Hercubot knows of this and backs off to join the rest of the team, focusing Xaxus, who just got a 3-man counter-strike on Jax after jumping in. Overpow is now completely safe, so he flashes in to get in range to ult Xaxus, who is being focused by 0-0 and Freeze. Jankos manages to get a sneaky kill on Miffy's Annie, and Overpow kills Hercubot, who tried to re-engage, but got instantly blown up. Xaxus almost escapes, but Freeze's double shot is just too strong. So just to show how essential Kayle was in KMT's comp, the fight where Overpow was a bit too overconfident cost to his team a teamfight loss, 3 for 2, with Selvar dying a bit later, so a 4 for 2 in total. Let's look at the fight really quick. Kayle is separate from the rest of the team when the fight starts. She's chunking down Riven, but Nukeduck does an amazing turnaround, knocking her up with broken wings. Renekton joins quickly and Riven still hits Wind Slash before Overpow can ult, meaning his ult didn't protect him from the burst. When the ult runs out, he gets stunlocked by Renekton and Riven and ends up dying. So when Overpow wasn't in position to use his damage and utility, his team paid the price and lost. Fortunately, this fight did not mean defeat. Last fight, after catching out Hercubot and getting an uncontested Baron again, KMT take the mid inhibitor and split. The team goes top and Overpow goes to split bot lane, putting NIP into a really complicated situation. They either 1. Fight 5v4 on top lane and let Overpow push, or they try to kill Overpow and hold top with the numbers disadvantage. They go for the latter, and this is where it all goes wrong. So Riven and Renekton go all in on Overpow, and here what I want to showcase is his target preference and his timing on his ultimate. Riven is priority. She's the heavy damage dealer, not Renekton. So if Overpow can kill her quickly, he'll have a fighting chance against Renekton. Truth being, even if he had lost, taking one with him would be enough for the rest of KMT's team to finish the game. So Overpow manages to land DFG plus Reckoning plus a Lichbane proc Righteous Fury before Riven can even touch him, and the moment she does, he immediately uses his ultimate. By now, Riven is at about 20% HP, and really the ultimate just gave Overpow time to get his E off of cooldown so he could activate it once again for another Lichbane proc. So essentially what happened was Kayle's 30-second ultimate allowed her to take absolutely no damage from Riven, and despite being stunned by Renekton, the ultimate duration is so long that she could still remove Riven from the equation before having to duel Renekton. Since he was at full HP with Kayle, he was able to win an unexpected 1v2 and ultimately take game 2 with his team.
They have to ban Kayle next game!
So that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the analysis. Kind of long, but there was a lot of points I wanted to showcase. So yeah, that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoy the video. I'll see you guys in the Rift. Shakarez signing out.